Hi everyone. This is Vasyl from the BDN CPAs, and today we have a special guest, Peter Frampton, the founder of Color Accounting Methodology. And I already did quite a few videos on color accounting and with some synopsis and summaries to give people a gist of how it works with a brief demo. But I thought it would be really cool to have Peter, the founder of that methodology, talk a little more about the origins, how it all came about, and so that he talks about his perspective and the impact of color accounting that he's seen for a couple of decades now. Peter, go
It's
ahead.
lovely to be here with you, Vasyl. Great pleasure. And yeah, it's a long journey that's got us here, and very happy to share with you how it all came about. Um, I suppose I should just introduce myself a little bit. I'm a South African, and uh, I studied at the University of Cape Town in South Africa before I immigrated. It was the old days under apartheid in South Africa. I didn't want to do the military service. I went to Australia, I became a chartered accountant, what CPAs in America would think of as
Yeah.
chartered accountants in Australia. Um, and I started with what was then Pete Marwick Mitchell. It's become KPMG subsequently. So I go back a long way, showing my age. And anyway, my experience of learning um, accounting at university was a painful one. I struggled. I'd done well at high school, and I had an academic ego about me, and I failed. I failed accounting 101. It was the first thing in my life I'd ever failed, and it came as a shock. So I went to Australia anyway and got through my board exams, and but I met the national training manager of KPMG, what is now KPMG, and we both shared our experiences that it was hard and people don't understand the stuff. I really think that even people who do graduate with their degrees and qualification in accounting, they often they get through, but they haven't got a solid foundation, a conceptual underpinning of the beauty of the model that is accounting, balance sheets and income statements. So anyway, I we parted ways. I went my way and I became an entrepreneur. I set up some medical businesses in New Zealand and did various things. And then years later, found my way back to,
So you built some medical businesses in New Zealand, but then you found your
yeah,
way
yeah, yeah,
back to accounting, right?
yeah. Years later, I found myself back in South Africa, and actually, I was running a business startup incubator, and I said, let's revisit that idea to uh, find a better way to teach accounting. What the conversation that I had begun with Mark Robilliard all those years before at KPMG. So we had this idea of using color and making debits green and credits orange, and uh, began this idea and started using the kinesthetic aids, buckets and tickets, and that people could use their hands, which of course there's a lot of learning science now that expresses how effective that is. And slowly we started to improve the system. But here's what I think is interesting about it is that we printed a diagram using color and then effectively said over the next decade probably and more said we don't understand this diagram, like we
Yeah.
don't properly understand this diagram. you know
Mm.
we were all excited about, oh, debits is green and
Mhm.
credits is orange, and if you put a green tick in an orange bucket, you're debiting a credit account. How cute. And look, definitely neurologically the human brain responds to color quicker than it does left and right. So
Mhm.
there's a whole lot of value in using color. What we didn't see that was a surprise is that the language of accounting and how much confusion in a in people's understanding in accounting came from the words and
Yeah,
how ambiguous and paradoxical the words are. You'd agree,
yeah,
Vasil?
it's interesting how professors usually tell you, oh, accounting is the language of business, but they gloss over that. It's like it's a nice saying. We just call accounting a language of business, but not enough emphasis is placed on truly dissecting that language.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah,
I've never really stopped to think that angle that you've just said is that we say it's the language of business, but we don't
right,
examine it as a language.
right,
Exactly. So in reflection, what we printed this diagram and fast forward, you know how we now call that diagram the basis board, which is
right.
acronymic for balance sheet, BAS, income statement, basis board,
Mm,
and and you know yourself through your experience how powerful it is to be able to point revenues down here, cash is up here, etc. And that literally that pointability is so powerful. I like to say that the basis board does for accounting what the Macintosh did for computing with the mouse. You can
right.
point. I mean, imagine we take it for granted now that you can point at your phone, point at a computer, right? But you didn't have that back then. And so the diagram showed us what we didn't know, and we began this exploration into language. And years later, uh, it's so effective. We said to them, why didn't someone do this before? Because this is just a game changer. And I think it was because Steve Jobs, the famous Steve Jobs, said you
Right.
only join the dots years later and you make sense of what was happening years later. In 1995, 96, the Hewlett Packard 500C inkjet color printer came along. And so that's why we printed the diagram. And of course, you couldn't have printed the diagram easily until then. And we
Mhm.
started mucking around. And that's when the diagram showed us that we didn't fully understand it. And particularly, just to speak a little bit about the language, probably the biggest thing in color accounting is the definition of equity, and that equity is actually an obligation. People say equity is the leftover assets. No, that would make equity an asset, and equity is not an asset because assets are assets and equity is in on the other side of the balance sheet, and so on. So that languaging, as you've agreed, is profound, and it all came because this diagram showed us how ambiguous we were being.
Yeah, and it's interesting even in the societal level when we talk about the rights and obligations in the society, then the perception is it's like there must be equity in the society. And we tend to conceptualize that, oh, this is my right, to be treated fairly, no discrimination, all that. We tend to approach it from that angle, but not so much from the obligation side. Say, but it also means my active participation in that civil society. It's it's
My
if
duty, my
yeah,
obligation to, yes,
right. So I'm saying it's an interesting parallel to the civil society.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you're rapidly taking this into the space about the implication of what the balance sheet is saying. And one of the well, whew, yeah, it's very quickly when you see accounting in the way that we see it in the basis board model, and when you see that the fundamental accounting equation is assets is equal to obligations because we define debt and equity as both obligations, then you're saying that, okay, to whom is the entity obligated? Clearly, it's obligated to the bank and all those contractual obligations. And then you very quickly get into the political question of, well, the residual obligation, equity is the residual obligation. Does the shareholder get it all? Which means you don't have an obligation to the environment, to employees, to shareholders, is it only to shareholders? To the community? And is it stakeholder capitalism or is it shareholder capitalism? Yeah, I think you're right to create this linkage between the implications for society.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned KPMG, your background from KPMG, and now KPMG is showing its innovation again with being the first big four firm that wants to own the law firm. Well, in the United States, it's not possible because the law firms must be separated from the CPA firms, but KPMG wants to revolutionize that, and they are lobbying for the change in laws so that the lawyers and CPAs can own the firm together. So it's
Mm,
we see KPMG being on the cusp of innovation yet again in the professional services
Interesting.
world.
Interesting. Yep. Yep. I wasn't fully aware of that.
Yeah, so as far, like as far as color accounting methodology, when you went to market with that model, like was it 1999 when you started going to market with that model?
Yes, we started experimenting in about 1999 with this new system, and but certainly it's evolved since then. We were not clear on, for example, the definition of equity as an obligation. We used to say net asset slash uh, other definitions, but we found ourselves over the years stripping away. We weren't adding definitions. We were stripping things away and it was becoming more and more naked. It was quite amazing. And then other innovations, linguistic innovations slowly came about, like realizing what is revenue? What is revenue? I don't know how to explain what revenue is. Ah, certainly realizing that income doesn't come in
Right.
and because what comes in, so you've got income down here in our model, income revenue. I'm going to treat those as synonymous. What comes in is cash, but income doesn't come in. No, because income revenue is a verb, not a noun. And people have said, what? That's
Yeah.
crazy talk. No, it's not. That's language talk. Income is what you do, which is why another name for the income statement is the statement of activities, because income is the activity that gives rise to cash or accounts receivable or gold watches, right? It's the
Right.
value generating activity. And so that definition of income revenue as value generating activity took a long time. And of course, there were some little mishaps along the way. I call them slightly tongue in cheek mishaps. I'm on the adjunct faculty of American University. And I remember having an argument with a Georgetown professor in Washington, D.C. I lived in D.C. for 10 years. And saying, well, income means revenue. And she said, no, no, income means profit.
Yeah.
And of course, well, I said, no, well, that's net income. By her argument, she's saying, well, net income and net income are the same thing then. Well, there's another example of how we confuse lay people. If we say net income and income, same thing, and so
Well,
on.
you see,
Look,
like we see in the US, the term income is acceptable as a synonym for revenue in taxation, but not from the standpoint of generally
of
accounting
gap.
principles, because
Yeah.
there its revenue is the top line.
Yes.
But the tax language allows that the use of income in the European sense. So
In
like
there, exactly.
we
And that's
see,
what I didn't realize. I'd come from Europe and I didn't realize that, oh, in Europe, income is top line. But in America, other than what you've just pointed out in tax, income is, she was right. She
right,
won the argument more than I won the
yeah,
argument, is that income refers to bottom line. Although it's not strictly speaking defined under FASB's statement of accounting concepts. They talk about comprehensive income, actually. They don't talk
right,
about just income on its own.
right.
Mm.
Yeah, and then we take it into neurolinguistic programming and paying attention to how we speak and what we say. Because, like, for example, if I say, I'll try to do that, sounds like very vague. So the listener may think I'm not sure if he's gonna do it versus I'm committed to doing that. So
Yes.
that's how we program ourselves too through the precise use of language. So even implications in habit formation, in accountability, in sticking to our responsibilities,
Yes.
and all that.
Yes. I think that there are going to be a whole lot of research and PhD theses done on the linguistics of finance.
Right.
And I think it's going to be an evolving area where when people come to accept what we are really pioneering in this, the way we language the fundamental concepts of, we call them the five cardinal elements, right? Revenue, equity, liabilities, assets, and expenses, which is how we describe these cardinal
Yeah,
elements.
and the beautiful acronym that Color Accounting uses is RELAX.
Relax. Revenue, equity,
Right.
liabilities, assets, and expenses. Yeah, relax.
Right.
And then, of course, when people get clear with that, they'll start to realize that, people talk about you get revenue. No, you actually do revenue. You don't get revenue. If revenue is an action, then you should do it, not get it.
Right.
Cash is what you get, revenue is what you do. Now, look, human beings don't speak that way. It'll be interesting to see how the language evolves about whether people do start to speak in a more clear way that captures the duality, the underlying duality of accounting.
Yeah, I have a 2.5-year-old son. So when we play with him, he likes to turn the trucks over and get the screwdriver, and he loves to pretend as if he is fixing it. So he loves like he loves like drilling sound. So it's the drilling sound of doing the work. That's the
Fantastic.
that's the revenue.
And that's
He's
the sound of, yes, if he's the mechanic, the drilling sound is the sound of his revenue. Exactly. Yes. As you know, we like to say, what's the sound of revenue? And everybody says ka-ching, which is the sound of a cash register. And then we say, no, but ka-ching is up here in our model, the basis board model. Assets are up here. That's where the ka-ching's happening. Down here is your son fixing that
right.
truck.
Yeah, and another thing that he really connected was pow pow, because when we talk about like debit and credit is like simultaneous effect here and there. He loved it pow pow sound too.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Pow Pow, which is our acoustic anchor for double entry, of course. Yeah. Yeah. The fact
Yes,
that we've got to have two impacts.
yeah. So then flipping it back to the language directly. So color accounting is available in several languages right now. Could you name those languages, the current languages in which it's available, and then the trajectory, which languages you expect that to be available?
Very good. So thank you. We are currently available. Ooh, let me get this right. We're available in English, um, Afrikaans, which is from South Africa, right?
Mhm.
Uh, um, Spanish, French, Polish. What am
And
I missing?
Romanian, right? Romanian too.
Romanian and Portuguese. We've got it into Portuguese, right? I think Brazilian Portuguese, right?
Mhm.
Now we are committed to having that in 10 languages by the end of the year. So I know you're interested in getting it into, I think it's German and Ukrainian.
Ukrainian, yes. Yeah.
Yep. And so we'll be working on that. And also we have one book on Amazon which is only available in English. It's about 350 pages, but we're about to publish in the next 6 months a shorter version, more accessible version, um, and that will be available in. I'm setting us a goal of 10 languages by the end of the year.
That's
So that'll
great.
be like a 125 page book. We really want color accounting to be out there in the world. And we want to partner with people like you to get it into the hands of non-English speakers.
And I love that the title of that book is The Joy of Accounting, and it really connects to that painter, US painter Bob Ross, who was
Yes,
teaching people
the,
he called it the joy of painting.
lovely.
and
Yes,
and he thought he had a strong and fundamental belief he could teach anybody. So like I really struggle with painting. It really came difficult for me because I'm a creative person when it comes to words and things like that, but not necessarily to painting. So that was super difficult. But when I discovered Bob Ross, and he really kept on saying anybody, absolutely anybody can
mm,
get. Here's like I'll teach you some basic strokes, but you use your imagination. Anybody can get it. And then color accounting uses the same model. It's like, look, with the right approach and methodology, absolutely anybody can get it. There is no reason why it should be out of reach of anybody. So allow
yes,
the joy of accounting connecting to Bob Ross's joy of painting. And
yes.
people who think I can't do it, Bob Ross made a point, and Colorado County is making point. Absolutely, anybody can get it.
Anybody can get it. Yeah, that's our mission. Is to our mission, WealthVox, which is the owner and publisher of the Color Accounting Learning System, or we sometimes call it the Color Accounting Learning Methodology, CALM, CALM, and our mission is to give anybody and everybody access to the financial conversation because not everybody needs to be an expert, but they can be a financial leader, where a leader is someone who engages in the conversation, asks the right questions, and steers things in a leadership way. You don't have to be an expert, but we want you to have access to the financial conversation. And we really believe anyone can have that access to the financial conversation. In fact, it's probably worth saying, Vasyl, that we're pioneering accounting literacy. So all of your listeners have heard of financial literacy. You know, if you Google the phrase, you put quotes around, and you Google the phrase financial literacy, you get millions of hits in Google in half a
Uh,
second, as Google likes to boast. But if you Google the phrase accounting literacy, relatively nothing comes up.
I think like
Accounting
what
lit
was like 20,000 results versus like
20,000
millions for
versus millions. No, nothing comes up.
yeah.
Yeah, 20,000 is nothing. And half of them refer to an accounting literacy foundation that we established to promote accounting literacy. Because accounting is not seen as a form of literacy, and yet you and I agree it is a form of literacy. You know,
Absolutely.
reading, writing, arithmetic, reckoning, financial reckoning is what everybody should have a handle on. And we've seen lives changed when people just have access, basic access to thinking straight about finances.
Yeah, and reckoning is another beautiful word because it's like coming to terms with something. So in the language of accountability, usually, I mean, from behavioral perspective, people don't want to open their bank account because they don't want to reckon with the true state of affairs. So
Beautiful.
like I haven't used that word reckoning in this sense, but I'm gonna start using it because I think it has beautiful connotations of coming to terms and embracing accountability and responsibility in one's life.
True reckoning. True reckoning. Yep. And when you take a reckoning, it's like you set your compass, right? Isn't that a navigation term as well? You set your
Right.
reckoning. Yeah, love it. Love it.
Yeah, so what attracted me to color accounting, I was looking for a way to do, I was a controller for the family conglomerate in South Carolina, so they had multiple employees, like 3,500 at that point. So healthcare, hospice, assisted living. And the CFO came to me and is like, Vasyl, you like teaching, you like coaching. Why don't you come up with some course to do apprenticeship in accounting? Because the owner of the firm instituted apprenticeships, so they were offering different apprenticeships, including in accounting. So I was thinking, I don't want to do like old and trite accounting course. Let me search for something more engaging and interesting than that. So I did a search online and I stumbled and I just typed innovative ways of teaching accounting, and that's
Oh,
how I stumbled on your course. So I purchased the book. I started flipping through that, and the idea that I connected most with was where you're explaining that about the tension in life, and you quote Viktor Frankl, who said that the point of life doesn't lie in a tensionless state, but it lies in struggling and fighting for a noble cause, a freely chosen task. So
mm,
he says the goal of life is not tensionless state; it is struggling and fighting for a worthwhile cause, and then you connect that to the tension between value generation and value destruction. And the goal is to make sure that the value generation exceeds the value destruction, i.e., the company posts profit at the end of the year. And I really love philosophical underpinning. If I don't understand the philosophy of something, it becomes boring very quickly to me. But once I read Viktor Frankl and connected that to life philosophy, I mean, I knew that that was the great way to approach it because I mean, it really clicked to me. I was like, I'm really sold in this method because it doesn't talk just about accounting, but it talks connects that to even bigger principles of physics and that meta and anti-meta for each reaction there is counter reaction, and then to bigger things of life such as suffering and struggling for
yes.
something worthwhile and noble.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I love how you do that, Vasyl. You connected to the true essence of life.
And then besides, so when we go back to the elements of color accounting, so it's language, you named language, and then we have structure,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
then we have moment of
Mechanics,
mechanics. So could
movement or
you talk
mechanics. Yeah.
so, like the way I simplify it to people, I like, look, color accounting is a way that helps you learn accounting based on two colors and three pillars of language, structure, and moment. So could you talk a little bit more about structure and moment of accounting?
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. So uh, after many years, we realized that there were three aspects that you needed to get, right? So we often represent them graphically as a chain, sort of three links in a chain, because you need to have all links in place. The chain is as strong as its weakest link. If
Right.
any one of those is broken, then I didn't understand accounting because I didn't get the words. Well, I didn't understand accounting because I didn't understand the ups and downs. Well, I didn't understand accounting because I didn't understand the two sides of the balance sheet and how that works.
Yeah.
So that's what we call structure, language, and mechanics. And by addressing those methodically and making sure that each one is in place, we guarantee an understanding of the full concept, right? It's to draw an analogy which you'll relate to. It's the opening famous opening line of Anna Karenina, Tolstoy's novel, is all happy families are the same. All
Mhm.
unhappy families are unhappy in their own way, right? In other words, they've got their different breakage points. But to be
Right.
happy, you got to have it all together. To understand accounting, you got to have it all together. So language we've talked about. You get these paradoxical words like income doesn't come in. People misunderstand what equity is. They think liabilities are money you owe. No, liabilities are measured in monetary terms, but they are not themselves. A liability is not money,
Right.
and so on, right? Um, so that's language. Uh, Mechanics is ups and downs of, for example, or movement. Uh, I collect books that say you have to have an entry on each side of the ledger. No, you don't. You can have two entries on the one side of the ledger. Those books, two of them are published by Harvard Business School Press. One of them was actually the official guide to QuickBooks in the United States. And they're confusing the journal with the ledger. It becomes so clear in color accounting. We have buckets and tickets. Buckets
Mm.
and tickets. You always have to have two tickets, one orange, one green ticket, but you can have two green buckets, two orange buckets, and so on, right? So look at that. My balloons just went off.
Mm.
And so you think it's insignificant, but it's so easy. It is so easy. And yet, there was a woman in Washington, D.C., who there was this voice from the back of the lecture theater of the training room that said, oh, I can finish my MBA. And I stopped the class and I said, What? What do you mean you can finish your MBA? She said, I quit accounting because I couldn't get this business of you can have two entries on one side. And accounting was a prerequisite, so I threw in the MBA. That is a life lived a bit smaller than it should have been. And it's your and my job to make sure that doesn't happen for the people we come into contact with, Vasyl. I know you know that. And
Yeah, I think it's equivalent. It's equivalent to chemistry in the medical field. So many people gave up on their dream to become a doctor because they couldn't get organic chemistry. So equivalent of that in the business world is not getting accounting for the MBA degree.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think you came up with you and another guy. I think was it like Dave, the like who was a professor in in
In
in
Exeter,
in Britain. So
yes,
I think you were sharing the last meeting about the green frogs and orange frogs,
yes,
and I think that spoke to me. I was like, wow, that's the best explanation I heard about mechanics. So basically, you said when the orange frogs eat something orange, they get bigger, and when the green frogs eat something green, they get bigger too. So the like increases the like. So once you
yes,
give that frog analogy, and frogs are linked to moment we're saying strong-legged leaping, like or leaping frog. So
Yes.
it's actually gives a connotation, a moment. So I
Yes.
thought like, wow, like what a cool example of using green frogs and orange frogs.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. We have a little video called Frogs and Flies. Yep. And when a green frog eats a orange fly, it shrinks.
Right.
Love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's mechanics of moment, ups and downs,
Yeah.
and then structure. Like how would you define structure?
Structure is why you have two sides of a balance sheet. Like, what? Are you just saying the same thing twice? And we unpack that and say, no, the two sides of the balance sheet are describing two completely different things. Color accounting is based on an ontological inquiry. So, what is ontology? Ontology is the branch of philosophy that looks at the nature of being. So, we ask ourselves, well, what is equity? And then you get to the understanding that equity is an obligation, a promise. Vasyl, have you ever seen a promise? Of course you haven't. A promise is in the ether. Promise is a speech act. It's a legal jurisprudential concept. It's you can't see a promise, but that's what equity is. So here's assets, which you can touch and see and feel. Although strictly speaking, assets are rights. Accountants are describing the rights to physical things sometimes.
Mhm.
And then you've got these obligations. So you've got valuable things and promises. Those are two very different things. And but people confuse it because they say, well, hang on, there's 50,000 of each. So 50 equals 50. You're saying they're the same. No, the amount is the same. The quantum, 50 of assets is equal to 50 of liabilities and equity, but doesn't mean they're the same in nature. They're only the same in amount. And one of the analogies that we give is we hold up. So look here, I've got two containers and I've got two pens. And I say to people, how are these the same? And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I say, the two-ness. These are pens. These are containers. It's only the two-ness. There's two of each, but they're completely different. Pens are not bottles,
Right.
right? And they might seem almost silly to be describing so seriously and intensely on a podcast, but these things trip people up. And after doing this for 25 years, we know we've discovered all the what we call thinking errors. They're just little thinking errors. And what you and I are trying to do is give people a declarative ability in finance, meaning the ability to explain things. Obviously, we want people to understand things clearly as well. But even for those, our colleagues, our professional friends, we want to help them learn to explain themselves better. Because if you ask most accountants what is revenue, it gets a bit awkward. They can't explain it. They know what it is. Of course, they know what it is. They know how to account for it. They know its tax implications. They know the recognition rules, etc., etc. But they can't explain it. And I've talked to lawyers who've said the jury committed him, but they sort of understood what he did. It's horrendous. The jury locked him up for 7 years and they kind of understood what revenue shifting was. They thought he put the money in a mattress, which is not what he did.
It's when we talk about, say, Navy SEAL training, a big portion of Navy SEAL training is arousal control, but then we talk about metacognition and visualization, and then micro goals with the front size focus. So that point about metacognition is thinking about thinking. So going back to cognitive fallacies is saying perhaps I didn't think about that right. And when we talk about the biggest life discoveries, so people cannot get traction in building a habit. They feel trapped and hung up. And usually they come to one day, they come to realization, I haven't been treating my body right, or I deserve better, my family deserves better. They come to that realization point that gives them motivation and impetus to get it going. But
Mm,
unless you get
mm.
to the point of clarity, if the person is in the point of mental confusion, you hung up, you cannot proceed further. The same with
Yes,
your point
yes,
about failing accounting course. You were hung up on certain points of accounting about the you were lacking clarity in understanding the structure language and mechanics, you couldn't proceed the same way as we cannot proceed in a certain habit or gaining traction until we gain clarity. What exactly does it mean? What are we trying to achieve? What will be the impact and outcome of all of that?
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Until you remove those blockages, you stopped.
Yeah, so
Mm.
now when we talk about the trajectory of accounting, when you look at it since 1999 when you went to market versus now, like where do you see the trajectory of color accounting going, especially now we everybody talks about AI, but sometimes we forget about more fundamental technologies such as debits and credits,
Mm.
the language of business. Where do you see the trajectory of color accounting going?
So AI, just to pick up on your reference to AI we think is actually a threat to people's understanding of accounting and finance because it's gonna do it for us, and yet so people will understand less, and yet they still need to. We can't hand it over to this AI. If you ask AI at the moment, if you ask AI to explain accounting to you, it gets it wrong because it'll regurgitate the collective intelligence, which currently is wrong. The
Yeah, so
collective intelligence says that revenue is money coming in, which it's not.
yeah, so to your point, you love giving this example. Ask AI what is revenue, and it will start definition with money that comes in is something to
Terrible.
the fact that it starts with money. Yeah.
Terrible. So our mission at WealthFox is we're a social benefit. We think of ourselves as a social benefit corporation, and where we want to make an impact on society, and we're trying to earn a shareholder return. And we want to transform accounting literacy in the world. We want the world to be accounting literate, and we're going to change the way accounting is taught because there's a better way, right? And so we actually have two divisions. We work in corporate training and with partners like yourselves, and then we also work in schools and universities. And we're gaining traction. We're in a lot of universities and we're in a lot of high schools in the US, and we want to support accounting teachers just to have fun, be more effective, and we've seen it time and time again. So as a business, where are we going? We want to make our resources more and more widely available. We've just launched an online version of our workshop for students, and I'm happy to make the offer that listeners to your podcast can also get access to our free version of this online training for the next few months, let's say. So there's a bonus for your clients. And yeah, we've just, my job is to spread the word. And it's a lot of fun. We're making progress. Um, we're seeing results.
Yeah, I think I think like thank you for extending the offer about like the free online course and listeners, you heard you can take advantage of that and really get a more in-depth understanding of what it entails because we explain the essentials of color accounting, but it's once you dig into that, it becomes much more fascinating. It's really curiosity and adventure of life, and this is accounting is one of the aspects of life. But once we understand the syntax of accounting, then we can extrapolate that into life habits, into societal life and order, and many other things. And
Absolutely.
back and
People can run their businesses more profitably. We've seen people sell their businesses at a greater value than they would otherwise have. We've seen people get into mergers and acquisitions and expand their businesses because now they're starting to be comfortable with being in the financial conversation to acquire others. I'm coaching a New York entrepreneur at the moment who was very good at technically, but wasn't confident around the finances. And we're getting him comfortable, and he's starting to acquire other companies on the back of that knowledge. There's so much uh, possibility and new opportunities that emerge when one develops a comfort in the face of not being comfortable around this topic.
And back to your point about AI, like AI is a great tool, it really helps simplify a lot of things. Uh, my brother is a carpenter, so I had a conversation with him the other day, and I was like, look, I can go into Chat GPT and I can come up with a way to build something. So like I can come back to you and say, Andy, this is the way I build it. And then you tell me, okay, Vasyl, now go and build that. Just because I found all of that information on AI doesn't mean I can go and implement it
Yes, yes,
because I simply accumulate information. So I really like E.O. Wilson, American biologist,
yeah, sure.
that the world is drowning in information but thirsting for knowledge.
Mm,
That's why
mm,
the future belongs to the synthesizers, people who aggregate the information
mm,
and can
mm.
distill it to actionable points. Because until
Yes.
we distill it to clarity and actionable points, it's useless information. We can impress somebody, but it's not actionable. So
Right. Yeah.
when we when we had the tax courses in college, the professor was adamant about doing tax returns by hand, and he said, "Of course, you will be using the tax software for your in your CPA firms, but I really want you to do it by hand, so you understand how it works, the mechanics of doing the
Mm,
tax return."
mm,
So the same
mm,
way with what you're saying about understanding that while AI can be a great enhancer and save a lot of time, but at the same time, when we are reaching for the fundamental understanding, that may not be the best tools
mm,
to understand how accounting works.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. AI
Yeah.
will just give back to us the complexity that we've given it.
Then with Mark Polanyi wrote the book. It's called Tacit Knowledge. So it ties into what you said, that so often we understand exactly what it means innately by virtue of practicing it for many years, but it doesn't mean we can articulate or teach somebody that. So it's when you teach somebody to ride a bicycle, and it's one thing, you got to develop the feel for that balance for riding the bicycle. It's hard to impart the tacit
Mm,
innate knowledge to somebody. You got to help somebody try it and feel it out for himself. So I think that's the advantage of color accounting, trying and feeling it out. Because if I just read the book, the words on paper, of course, I can follow the lines on the page with my finger, and when I touch the page, I get the tactile component tucked into that, and I retain the information better. That's
yes.
already helpful,
Ha.
even moving the finger on the paper.
Wow. Wow.
But
Wow.
but,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then but then
Amazing.
when we talk about the monopoly like board of color accounting,
Yeah.
and the people can literally put the green and orange stickers into the square boxes of the actual box. So A, we have the visual component of
Yes.
color, plus B, we have the tactile component of actually feeling it with our fingers. So that's why we say accounting comes alive, because we are not just regurgitating information. We are saying, look, like riding a bicycle, you cannot feel that balance. You get feel that balance until you actually feel it for yourself. So the color accounting board says, look, here's the board, here are the colors. I want you to feel it for yourself, because that's the only way to get to clarity and to your understanding.
Yeah. 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 Or bring all of the human experience and bodies and senses to the learning. Yeah.
So as far as the kinesthetic aids, do you ever like recommend moving around? Because I found that sometimes sometimes when I just read the book at the desk, then I don't retain as much. When I get the book and I start moving around in the office, because of that motion, I tend to retain it more. And I understand there are different types of learners. There are
Mm,
auditory
mm,
who rely on
mm,
hearing. There are more visual. There
mm,
are more kinesthetic and moving types. But based on
mm,
your experience of teaching different people of
mm.
different backgrounds, how do you feel about combining different methods, meaning auditory,
mm.
versus kinesthetic? Where do you see the interplay? Do you
What,
see some useful combination in learning styles?
Absolutely. We've experimented with many of the senses, and certainly we've played with students on with a layout on carpets, and you've got to stand in different places. Come and stand over here as an asset. Now stand over here as a liability, and embody the sense of what it is. We've my sister-in-law actually is a nose. What is a nose? Well, that's someone, a perfumer who creates scents, and I've had her create the smell, the strong, solid smell of an asset, and this burnt cordite kind of smell of an expense. So even try to have an olfactory
Right.
senses of this, kinesthetics, and then obviously people explaining things. So we do it in our workshops. We don't have people moving around all the time. Perhaps we should do it more than we do, but we certainly have people explaining. So when you explain, how it is, the best way to learn is to teach or to explain yourself. We try and have it really be alive and a full body, full sensory experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate the
Mm,
methodology and employing the senses, really thinking not only, oh, I'm so smart because I am a CPA, I can impress people with that
mm,
knowledge, but really approaching that from the angle, I really want to be able to impart that knowledge in the most effective way because that's how we build our societies. We teach our kids, and then there is law and order in the society, and we always rely on the transference of information.
mm,
But if that transference of information is very shallow, I think one of the reasons we have so many societal ills because we want just to say something and say, well, I said so, but we didn't really get, get into the specific learning style of this person to make it make sense for this specific person. And I
mm,
think once we start experimenting with different methods, be it olfactory or visual or auditory or kinesthetic, seeing what works for this specific individual, and then that specific individual have his own aha moments, and then he can help somebody else and spread the chain, spread that ripple effect, going and contributing
mm,
to that
mm,
like more balance and more
mm,
beauty in the world through the joy of accounting and through the joy of learning. Really, it's like the
mm,
joy
mm,
of discovering the world, thinking about thinking, really learning for ourselves. And once we learn it, it's like wishing that for the other person, like, hey, how can I get to this person and be helpful, not on my terms, but on the terms that this specific individual
mm,
can
mm,
feel it and get it and really get excited and contribute the joy and excitement of life in his or her
mm,
own life.
mm,
So I really appreciate you stumbling on this method and coming to term, like going through your entrepreneurial journey and saying like, hey, even though I haven't practiced accounting for a while, but you did realize the fundamental value of a
mm,
lot of people getting accounting wrong and creating this
mm,
beautiful tool. I am very excited about what this year holds. And Peter likes to say that he wants to see this year to be the year of ubiquity for color accounting. The more people get excited about life, like really it's a tool about getting people excited about life. Once people get
Yep. Being
excited about
engaging
life,
with other human beings on
right.
clear terms. Yep. Living lives of freedom and empowerment and abundance. Yep. And overcoming fears, self-limiting fears. Ah, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing, what you're doing for for learning, for teaching financial literacy around the world. And thank you for coming to this podcast and sharing a bit of the background. And listeners, you heard what Peter said, that offer is available for a few months. So
Yeah.
please
Till
avail
till
yourself of
June
that
till June this
opportunity.
year. Let's get clear. We'll make it available until June this year. Free. It's worth hundreds of dollars. And Yeah, for your listeners, very happy to. They should contact you, and of course, you and I will coordinate and make those subscriptions available.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Like, and best of luck as you keep on doing this pioneering work of getting people excited about learning fundamental concepts of accounting.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vasyl.
Right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.